the topics and just keep it fairly short and let you know that what we'll probably do is come back to some of today's topics when we have more information to give you on some of these areas. So the first one, which was out of our newsletter, kindly prepared by Dr. Stephen Webber of our team on electrical vehicle fires. And I find this interesting because you see some things on YouTube and there's a whole series of cars catching on fire. And so Steve's outlined a number of things about what are the features of this. So the first thing is, the major cause of electrical vehicle fires, EV, so electrical vehicle fires, is collision or debris striking the batteries. So if the batteries are not damaged in good condition, I'm advised this is not a great risk. So therefore it's vehicle collisions or some other problem inside the batteries. I think I've also seen some poor connections in incident reports where they haven't correctly connected it. What we understand is it is an early warning sign, if you like, that there's a problem with your electrical vehicle battery. Popping sounds, it could be a hissing or whistling sounds, which is the gas venting out of the electrical cell, and possibly some strange smell is there and projectiles are being ejected. I'm going to show you a bit about this first, and then we'll come back to what the real risk is for you and for employers and businesses, by the way. So one of the reasons we've featured this is because fighting electrical vehicle fires is not standard. Fire brigades are getting over the top of this, but probably you and I and most businesses wouldn't know what to do if an electrical vehicle in their car park caught fire right now. And so what we know is, and what Steve has reminded us, is the key thing is we've got to cool the battery. The problem is the batteries are often in a metal case and underneath the vehicle floor, so they're not where the flames are necessarily that you're seeing in these scenes here. And so it's more difficult, and we're now hearing it may take many hours, even for a trained team of firefighters, to properly suppress an electrical vehicle fire. So that's probably going to relate to major traffic disruptions if these occur out on major roads, particularly during peak hour, because they're not going to be quick and easy to put out on the roadside. So there's just some things to be aware of. So what we know is workplaces should now be thinking about this as an issue. We didn't say it's the biggest issue that you've got. So I'll put this into perspective shortly. As Dr. Webber has reminded me, yes, there are electrical fires in vehicles, but they are not as predominant as people think. But because they're new, they're getting a lot of media attention. So this is part of it. Although one interesting thing I found on one of the video clips I saw in the top right-hand corner photo, this is only a photo here, but it was a video, part of a video clip, and that fire from one vehicle, I don't know why it caught fire, loose connection or faulty battery, spread to the truck next to it, and then to the vehicle next to that, and to the vehicle next to that. So it actually caught fire in a charging station. All of those vehicles were there, had a charging station, and they all caught fire one after the other. So clearly there are some risks. You would want to consider where have you located charging spots if you have them on your site. And increasingly, we think companies will have electrical charging stations on site. So as Steve reminded me, electrical vehicle passenger cars are not the main problem. So despite the fact we've just shown you there's some issues with it, very, very small number of electrical vehicle fires so far. So even with the growth of electrical vehicles, is still a small percentage, and not, I'm told, not disproportionate to the number of fires you might expect to have in internal combustion engine, i.e. with petrol, with vehicles. Having said that, I've told you they can be difficult and time consuming to put out. And the other interesting thing is it's not just the vehicles, it's things like electrical scooters and bikes are becoming, apparently are a bigger risk. And the reason for this is is that motor vehicles have a much higher standard to meet the Australian design rules, ADRs, to actually put a vehicle on the road. But scooters and bikes don't have to meet ADRs. So they could be coming from all countries around the world, some with much lower standards than we have typically in Australia, and particularly for Australian design rules for vehicles. And secondly, when you look into some of the garages and homes, think of how good the wiring system is and the plugs that they've got and using. So I think the risk of home fires, and this is what we're now hearing and seeing, is higher, probably because of the lower standard of scooters and electric bikes, and also the cables and the connections that people are using, which may be inappropriate. So people are just trying to connect however best they can into the electrical grid. So this is, we think, is part of it. So notwithstanding that, we think every workplace should now at least start to think about electrical vehicles. If we've got them on site, they still have a risk. They may bring a risk onto your property because they're going to be difficult to put out. Where are they parked? And particularly if you are charging electrical vehicles, where is that charging station? And I certainly wouldn't want it in proximity to an LP gas cylinder storage area or other combustible materials for the reasons that you can see here. No different to other potential ignition sources, it wouldn't be wise. So just something to think about for your business moving forward. Now, the other, I guess, bit of news, and many of you will have heard about the upcoming Victorian OHS amendment psychological health regulations. These were intended originally to commence in July. They've been delayed and we've not been able to establish the commencement date yet. But for those of interest, our good friends over at FCW Law, whose webinar starts at 10:30 this morning after ours, I believe will be providing a bit more information on this. It's probably Nina and Andrew Douglas that will be speaking to this. So I won't cover their ground, but just for those who only have time for us this morning, and we'll, in a future webinar, we'll go into greater detail and tell you specifically what you need to do. But just be aware right now, these amendment regulations we believe have been finalised. They were put out for comment as a draft. They have been finalised. We don't have the commencement date. So it's been delayed and I don't know why, but we expect that to be soon. So the key thing that you just need to be aware of at this point is there is now a proactive duty for businesses to identify and control psychological hazards. So you can't wait for people to complain that there is a concern or a problem. You need to have dealt with that before that complaint comes about. Otherwise, you haven't met your duty. Interestingly, the regs say you need to eliminate the psychological hazards where possible, as opposed to reductions. This is the normal hierarchy of control. And it may be my sense of humour, but if you tell me I've got to eliminate psychological hazards, I think the only way I know I can guarantee that is eliminate humans from the process. And you and I are not going to do that. We run businesses, we work with people, either large numbers or small. So clearly we can't eliminate, although we might be able to do some things. But I think largely we're going to be a reduction of risk. You'll be expected to have a psychological hazards prevention plan. So this is something, once again, more proactive. And under the regulations, a requirement to report all complaints that meet a particular criteria to work safe. So employees need to consider policies and procedures and work design. And just so I'll outline the key areas that when you talk about psychological health, 5 key areas which are outlined in the regulations. Bullying, you would expect, because that's been requirements on that have been out there for some time. Because we all know the OHS Act has long included psychological health as part of the definition of occupational health and safety. So we've always had psychological health and people have immediately identified bullying. 2, sexual harassment, and increasingly we're hearing what is the definition and criteria of that. 3, workplace aggression and violence. And we're hearing, as you've no doubt hearing anecdotally, with a lot of the COVID illness work pressures of staff, frontline people at call centres, at reception desks and serving customers, are seeing an increase in the amount of aggression, if not violence, that they're experiencing. So businesses will need to include that as the third item. The fourth, exposure to traumatic events or content. So the business has to think, what could our staff be exposed to, and how in our plan are we going to take that into account as best we can, as far as reasonably practicable. And the fifth one is job demands. So this is excessive high rate of job demand. It could be too low job demand and there's boredom. So this is creating a problem. It could be low job control. It could be poor support or poor supervision. So that fifth one of job demands, I think has been around for a long time as well, but it is now specifically included as one of the 5 elements that will be covered under the psychological health regs. So I'll just repeat the 5 areas again, because I haven't written it down, because we're going to do a follow-up webinar when these regulations come into force. So they're not in force at the moment, but some proactive businesses are already working on doing an assessment and developing a plan to how they're going to manage and deal with it. So the 5 areas, once again, are bullying, 2, sexual harassment, 3, workplace aggression and violence, 4, exposure to traumatic events or content. I'm assuming that could be even incidentally or accidentally off websites or whatever, as opposed to physical events in the workplace, and job demands. Too high, too low, poor training, poor supervision, poor guidance, excessive performance criteria, low recognition and low reward. So they're the 5 areas that the new amendment psychological health regulations are going to cover. We also hear and see similar regulations or amendments to the WHS regulations are occurring in other states as well. So this is clearly VIC at the moment under our OHS Act. Just another little bit of news. There has long been a code of practice in Victoria and some other states on how you manage safety across different languages. But Victoria has released an updated code of practice. Bear with me, I'm just trying to find my copy. Here we go. So it's dated of July this year, so it's quite fresh. The key things in the code of practice, once again, you can look this up and download it from the WorkSafe Vic website, obviously free of charge. The key considerations are, 1, you need to build a language profile. Myself and the team will be to site next week. Most of us will be there, and they tell us there that they've got 60 different languages on the one site, 60 on the one site. Obviously over 1,000 employees at the site, but nevertheless, that's very significant, something to deal with. So a language profile, consider written and oral communication guidance, which is in the compliance code. Safety signage, obviously, you and I will look to use graphical safety signage wherever possible, and probably to minimise written and oral communication. So we'll try and use more graphical. There are translation services available, and you need to look at that through WorkSafe first, or commercial ones. The code requires that you consider what we've just been speaking about as part of induction training, and the code suggests also that supervisors will need training in order to comply with the code, with this compliance code. There's also a checklist in the code, so this will help as a short way of doing your own internal self-assessment. So that's the new compliance code. This one is already current and out, so this is not like the psychological health regulations, which we've told you are coming, but no commencement date yet. This is already in force. This is a recognised compliance code in Victoria, so it has significant force in relation to your duty to consult this and meet or exceed the standards in that code as applicable to your workplace. So obviously, the bigger the site, the more variety of languages that might apply in your business, then the bigger the task this will be to take this on. So there's the compliance code. Another one, this is not necessarily electrical vehicles in this case, but it certainly was probably prompted by the growth of electrical vehicles in Australia, that the Competition and Consumer Motor Vehicle Service and Repair Information Sharing Scheme rules, it's called 2021, has been released. And this requires motor vehicle manufacturers to provide the same information that they release to their dealerships for registered training organisations, RTOs, and obviously Australian repairers. So this would be approved repairers of vehicles, so that they understand the risks that are associated with that vehicle, either in their training or their servicing of those vehicles. Lift the bonnet of a car these days, most of us are probably not going to touch too much. I think there's only a couple of yellow bits to check oil and water and the wiper fluid level, and that's probably about it for most of us. But if you take it to, say, a Toyota vehicle as an example, or Ford or anything else for that matter, but to a non-dealership, so a different servicing organisation, and they may be a normal, competent motor vehicle servicing business. This enforces the manufacturers to share that critical safety information with all of those Australian repairers and registered training organisations, but they have to buy it. But the law says that those manufacturers will have to sell that information for what they call a fair market value. So I guess if somebody has a complaint about that, they'll go to the Competition and Consumer Commission to seek redress if they think that's they're either not getting the information or it's not a fair market value that the manufacturers are seeking for that information. And so this law has come into effect. So it's a legal requirement, starting on the 1st of July. So if you happen to come across dealing with a motor vehicle servicing business and they are having trouble getting access to the critical safety information they need to know to service that vehicle correctly and safely, direct them to these new rules, and that's legally enforceable under the Competition and Consumer Act 2010. So that's another little bit of news there. Thanks again to Dr. Webber of our team to alert us to that one. And just a little recent court case, which I thought was interesting. Inadequate buddy system. So two companies were recently prosecuted when a worker was injured and found to have inadequate training and supervision after they relied on a verbal buddy system. Now, I think what most of us realise is that when new people come in, we rely heavily on what we would anecdotally call a buddy system. And we think that that's an appropriately qualified and experienced supervisor or manager or other worker to guide the person through a lot of the detail after they've had the initial induction. So just bringing to your attention, there's nothing wrong with a buddy system, but what this particular court case found, that they relied too heavily on the buddy system and inadequate formal training and possibly competency training. So where something is safety critical, you don't even rely on the verbal advice you gave or the instruction, training and guidance you gave. We would always recommend, where possible, move to training verified with competency testing. So whether it be a verbal test, a written test, or a mixture of both, or practical demonstration, we don't mind, but the record should show that was done. The person did understand what to do, what the requirements were in order to satisfy that duty of care. So in this case, the court found that the businesses, both the host company as well as the labour hire, failed to adequately train, or the labour hire firm to check that it was the task that their worker was doing had been adequately trained and safe for them to carry that out. So just, excuse me, another little bit of recent news, and maybe alerts you to maybe what your system is in your business and whether you just need to tweak that and refine it so you've got a little bit better records to verify the training you have given to your team. And probably the final just bit of news for this morning. Once again, maybe it's my sense of humour, and I just like this. You can't rely on verbal advice. And a senior lawyer once told me that there are two problems with verbal advice. He said, "Do you want to know what those problems are?" He said, one, the verbal advice may be wrong. The other problem is it may be correct. He said, either way, if there is an incident, both parties will deny whatever the verbal advice was, that they got it or that they understood it or it was inadequate. So in this case, what they've got here is a WorkSafe inspector visited a site, and the company, after an incident, tried to rely in court on the fact that the WorkSafe inspector either said it was safe or inferred that something in their business was okay or safe. And it's quite clear here from this case with Gerald Brennan versus Capital Weed Control Proprietary Limited. So this is the court case. So it's quite clear the court's view on this is that employers cannot rely on verbal advice from any government officials or other regulatory bodies. And we say in Safety Action, you shouldn't rely on our verbal advice either, only our formal advice on company letterhead. And that's probably just good guidance for you as well. So remember, WorkSafe inspectors are not sent out to do your internal audit, your internal inspections, your pre-start checks, or any of the stuff that you and I are meant to do in our own businesses. And one of the other things I remember from a senior lawyer is, so I've already told you there's two problems with verbal advice. It may be correct, it may be wrong. And the other one is you don't prove your own innocence by proving the guilt of others. And somebody might say, Your Honour, I was speeding in the car, but I was in a stream of traffic and everyone else was speeding. Well, that's an example of trying to prove your own innocence by proving the guilt of others. And the police will simply say, that may be true, Your Honour, but I caught this person. So this would be true with this. So don't assume that what you are doing in your business is simply common with others, and that the inspector came to your premises and never commented on your unguarded machine or unsafe practice. The inspector may or may not have seen it. And even if they have, they do not have a duty, like the police, they don't have a duty to catch every speeding driver. Their duty is to catch those that they catch. And if you're the one that's caught, you have to answer for your duty of care and your actions. You can't rely on the fact that others have also broken that law. So can't rely on a verbal advice. So don't assume any action or words of an inspector gives you assurance that something is safe. And particularly verbal. So that was the key things we wanted to share with you this week. As we said, we'd just like to have a short, bright and breezy update of the safety news each month with you. Hopefully, 6 topics this morning, which I've gone through fairly quickly. We're going to come back in greater detail on the psychological health, because this is a significant one. It covers every single business. So wherever human beings are involved, either in your business or customers, stakeholders, contractors, there is the potential that someone will speak harshly, will speak incorrectly, say the wrong thing, or just some action or gesture which is inappropriate. And these laws will be designed to focus on this. So we'll come back to this topic and a couple of the others as we get more information and move forward. So once again, thank you for joining us for our monthly update. Hopefully there's just been a few tips in there that might help you moving forward. And as always, if you have any questions or if you've got a topic you would like us to address in a future monthly webinar, which is our monthly safety updates, just let myself or any of the team know. So thank you once again. Thanks, Steve Webber of our team. He provided much of the information for this update on this occasion. And it was lovely to either hear or see the names on screen for many of the people watching in today. So thank you once again. Always great to hear or see you, and hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Bye.
Thanks very much, Gary. Have a good day.